Hello and welcome to Hardcover Feedback. I'm Kelly Campos.
And I'm Brandy Smits.
Today we've got 3 new books for you. The first one is going to be a ghost story. The second is a historical fiction novel. And the third is what we call slacker fiction. First up, we've got that horror story. It's called The Harrowing by Alexandra Sokoloff. Robin, who's an outcast college student, has problems kind of connecting with people because of her mysterious past. Well, she decides to stay at her college dorm over the Thanksgiving holiday. And she thinks she's the only one there, but she ends up being one of 5. And they're all kind of outcasts. They don't want to go home because they have a disturbed home life, as it were. The first evening, they find themselves in the lounge together with a Ouija board. They pull that out, and when Robin and one other girl use that, they connect with a spirit named Zachary, who they think is a student that died in that very dorm a couple decades before. Now, really, they've contacted a spirit much more dangerous than any human ghost. And then the story becomes about whether or not they will survive this encounter as they try to send this evil entity back to the void when he really does not want to go.
All right, I'm going to read a little segment of The Harrowing here. The rectangular box was brown with age and frayed at the edges, but Robin recognized the graphic on the front instantly, a Ouija board. Lisa's face was glowing, energized. She carried the box over to a round table and dragged the table across the carpet, positioned it in front of the fire. I bet there's plenty of spirits in this old place. Robin got a brief glance of faded handwriting on the inside cover of the box as Lisa took the board out and set it up on the table surface. Robin watched her with a dreamlike sense of unreality. A seance? It was too weird. She'd just been reading about Jung and seances that night before. On the floor in front of the hearth, Patrick started to laugh at them, saying, "Well, then we can play Spin the Bottle and sing Kumbaya in front of the fire." Lisa sidestepped Robin and smiled sweetly down at Martin as she snagged one of his candles. She crossed back to the round table, shielding the flame with a cupped hand, and set the candle down, then sat in front of the board and looked around expectantly. So who's going to do it with me? None of the guys moved.
This book read to me like an extreme teen horror movie. And it was very entertaining to me. The way she writes, she is a screenwriter.
Right.
And that totally leaps off the page. You know that you're reading a movie, pretty much.
It's so descriptive. I mean, you actually can envision everything in this book. It jumps out at you. And it's her first book, and she did a great job, and I really hope that she keeps writing, because I would love to read more.
Right.
But
I mean, definitely, even from the very first scene, which is Robin sitting in a large auditorium-style classroom, and her professor is talking about things that you just know are foreshadowing what's coming later. I mean, you can hear everything, you can see it, you can smell it. It's just like in a movie. And with a lot of fiction nowadays, you know, there's a strong line of demarcation between, well, I'm reading a book, or I'm watching a movie, or I'm playing a video game, whereas this really kind of melds all the modern genres into one thing, and you can experience it on lots of different levels.
It can be easily transformed into a movie, which I would personally like to watch. I think it would be very interesting to see this as a movie. Because it totally just rips apart any kind of horror movie that they make for the for teens now, and it's just, it's so much more intelligent and well thought out.
Right.
With all of its references to different things like psychology and religion. It's great.
And they, you know, I've read a couple other reviews on this book, and all of the book people reviews were negative. They say, you know, oh, it's a stupid book. It's, you know, it's just like one of those stupid movies and blah, blah, blah. Whereas all the people who actually read it really enjoyed it. And I think that if you go at it with, it's a novel, it's not going to change the world. We know this.
Well, yeah. It's entertainment.
It's entertainment, exactly. And if you go at it with that mindset, it is very, very entertaining, but it also does have some very interesting and intelligent things. Like you said, the ghost in this book is not a human ghost. The ghost, again, without telling too much.
I was like, wait, don't
I know,
go.
we don't want to, wait, how can I say it? Without telling too much, the ghost in this story is based on Hebrew mythology.
Right.
That's what we'll say, the creation
Yeah, the
stories.
Hebrew creation myth.
And I mean, how many ghost stories do you find with that?
I didn't even know there was a Hebrew creation myth.
Exactly.
I didn't even think that existed.
Exactly. And after reading this, I was so interested in the story. I had to go and look up a little bit more about it just to find out, well, wait a minute, what is this? You know, and it's very interesting, you know, the way that she ties that all in with these kids at a college dorm, you know.
Well, there's also the whole like psychological thing where Robin and Martin specifically are psychology students.
Right.
And they're just studying the Jungian Freudian versions of psychic connections to people and using your mind and what can you uncover unconsciously and make you believe as reality.
Right, which that's the thing at first is the one guy is completely insistent that, well, no, it's us doing it. It's our collective minds doing this together. And it's like, well, is it that, or is it really this ghost entity thing, you know, which is another level of discovery within that book. You know, it's like, is it this, is it that? You have to figure it out and suspend your belief or suspend your disbelief to figure out exactly what is going on in this story.
There are many cynics in this. There are many people that are like, this is stupid, you know, so-and-so's doing this, so-and-so's making this noise, this isn't real. But on the the underlying fact is, you know what, it really could possibly be real, and maybe you need to, you know, turn off your real life, this isn't real, this is all movie stuff, and actually consider reality as something bizarre.
Right, exactly, because reality is bizarre.
It
Strange
is.
things happen every day. Hey, we're doing a book TV show. Who knows?
We are.
For me, although I did enjoy the story and I thought it was a fun read, I couldn't give it any more than 2.5 stars. It was interesting, but it wasn't anything that that stretched me too far, other than the one basic kernel of the story that got me very interested in the Hebrew mythology story. Other than that, it didn't stretch me too far. So I gave it 2.5 stars.
I think I'm going to give this one 3 this time. There aren't very many horror novels around that are actually good, and you know, besides the ones that were written like 70 years ago and something like that. But
right.
It's just, I thought for a genre that is not tapped that much, it was a really great book. So I would have to give it a 3 if you're interested in that kind of stuff.
All right, 2.5 and 3 stars, and we will be back.
Welcome back. Now we're going to be discussing a historical fiction book called Pirates by Celia Rees. In Pirates, Nancy Kington is a wealthy merchant's daughter living in Bristol, England in the 1700s. She is often lonely but enjoys the monetary privileges her father's plantation in Jamaica brings to her. Minerva Sharp is a young slave who is working on the Kington's plantation in Jamaica. Well, when Nancy's father dies, she is forced to move to the Jamaican plantation where she meets Minerva. And these two women are set about on a wild turn of events after enduring a brutal murder, an arranged marriage, and a set of ruby earrings. And then they find themselves sailing on the high seas in search of love, adventure, and freedom as pirates.
Number 10 of the articles of the pirates. No boy or woman to be taken to sea. If any man seduce a woman and carry her to sea disguised, he is to suffer death. This last had been a sticking point, and arguments threatened to break out afresh, with voices declaring that Broom was breaking his own articles. The captain replied as smooth as any lawyer, his argument running thus. Firstly, the women in question, us, were not being carried to sea by any one person for any immoral purpose. Secondly, everyone there knew perfectly well what sex we were, so we were not disguised as such. Thirdly, women on board could be useful, he added for good measure, and better than any set of false colors. For if we were up on deck in our feminine attire, who would take the ship for a pirate? Pirates.
I love this book.
Yes, I knew you would.
I like pirates. I can't help it. They're
Pirates
so
are fun.
cool.
Arg.
I would be a pirate, except I wouldn't want that parrot thing. But otherwise, a pirate would be a good job.
I found very interesting about this book, aside from the fact that there are female lead characters, which I always enjoy, the story behind the pirates themselves, how people became pirates in these days, was something that I had never really heard before. And they were talking about how legitimate Navy people or legitimate sailors, merchant sailors, if their ship is taken over by pirates or is attacked by pirates, the pirates often give them an option and say, okay, you can either be a pirate with us, or we can kill you, or we can set you on a boat and see you later.
Yeah,
you know.
just like throw them away and going, okay, fine.
Exactly.
But
See you later.
And so many people did it.
Yeah.
It was very surprising. In the book, like, they discussed a whole bunch of different ships, and every once in a while they'd be like, hey, there's so-and-so from that prestigious merchant vessel, and now
Right.
he's a pirate.
He's
It's
a
like,
pirate
okay.
captain. Yeah, but it was also like we were reading the number 10 of the articles. They had codes of honor, definitely.
Oh, yes.
Where if you were fighting with another person on board, then that was against the code. You had to settle all your differences on land with a pistol and a sword to first blood, and that's that. And then you couldn't argue about it anymore. So very strict ways of keeping order on board this pirate ship. Make sure everything went well.
The same thing with, like, you couldn't have alcohol.
Right.
You couldn't have any kind of, the women thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, if you were injured, say, you're, Peg Leg Pete now and you don't have a leg, they will pay you compensation for that. And even though you're kind of useless for what they
Right.
need you to do, they're like, fine, you can hang out for as long as you want then, because.
It's like workman's comp almost.
Exactly. It's piratical workman's comp.
Exactly. You stay till you get the amount of money that you were promised, and there you go. Which again was very interesting. Now, as far as the main story of this book, with Minerva and Nancy, with Minerva and Nancy, what I found most interesting about that was the transition from Nancy being this wealthy daughter, wealthy merchant's daughter, owner of this plantation. She finds out she's the owner, and she was completely against slavery. She did not quite realize the vast amount of slavery that was going on within her own family.
Well, and also in England, especially Bristol and stuff, there really weren't slaves. They were servants, but there weren't any, like, really big slavery, auctions and stuff happening
Exactly.
there. So it's kind of such a naive way of looking at life that she just assumed it wasn't real.
Exactly. The one black man that she knew up till then was actually a very good friend of hers. He was kind of her teacher. He's the one who taught her how to read, because he taught himself how to read, and he was free. He was their home servant, but he was free. And so she kind of thought that, all slaves were kind of like him, And she comes to a very rude awakening when she's kind of forced to go to Jamaica after her father dies. She does not realize that she's the owner of this plantation, and her brothers are basically trying to sell her off to the highest bidder, which is the Brazilian. Enter the villain. Dun, dun, dun. What'd you think of that guy?
I was like, okay, yeah, I would run away too. He
Yeah.
was just like the way he treated his sister, like, for instance, was always in, like, big black robes, and her face is covered.
Yep.
Blah, blah, blah. And she's not allowed to go anywhere or do anything, or sun can't touch her. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I would leave.
Yeah, he
I
was a
would
little
leave
freaky.
too.
He was a little weird, a little stalkerish.
Oh yes, little.
Just tiny bit.
Excessively stalker.
Especially since he commandeers a boat to try to follow her for what, a year,
Oh, yeah.
at least, to try to find her after she runs away. He's a very, very, he's a little bit of a two-dimensional villain in most ways, but that's all you need. You don't need, a
Exactly.
big complex villain in a story like this.
He doesn't really, say much. He's not one of those monologuing villains that have so much to say. He just kind of is there, and he's very scary.
Right, yeah, a very scary, evil presence just kind of lurking in the background. And he gives her those ruby earrings that that Minerva's mother tells her to get rid of. Says, you get rid of these. They're gonna just bring evil to you. And she decides not to because, oh, well, they might be valuable one day. They're really valuable. I can sell them. And inevitably, it's kind of hinted at throughout the book that these these jewels are what are drawing him to her. That's how he keeps finding her and getting closer to her, is by these jewels, you know, so there's some sort of magical properties or something. But
well, that and the realistic of if you're going to see somebody wearing these, you know, flawless ruby earrings, it's also that whole thing too, so.
Right, exactly. Like, I saw those before.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I really did enjoy this book. The historical aspects were well done. They were interesting without being overly detailed. So it wasn't like you were bogged down in all this history of in 1782, blah, blah, blah. But they were also lots of interesting facts, like when they went to Africa and took, with a slave boat that they had taken over, and they went to a town and freed all these people that were about to be put into slavery. The way they described the fort and everything was very historically accurate and very interesting to read as part of this exciting adventure tale that they were running in and freeing these people and getting all this money, because of course the money was the goal.
Of course.
You know? So those kind of things I found very interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't normal history. It
Right.
was history that is not really touched on too often because, you know, you don't really study pirates in school.
Right.
You know, it's not like one of those things that you learn much about unless you go out of your way to find it.
Right,
and that's what this book is. If you want to learn more, this is a good way to understand a little bit more of the life.
And in this book, they even mention the two female famous pirates
Of
we were
course.
speaking of.
Mary Reed and, oh, I can't remember her other name, Anne Bonny.
Anne Bonny, yes, Anne Bonny. So those were, they are mentioned in this story as famous at this time already. So it's not out of the ordinary for there to have been women pirates, you know, put into a set of circumstances and you're like, gotta go, I'm a pirate, see ya. And that's what these two did. So all in all, I gave this book 3 stars for overall enjoyability.
I gave this one 2.5 because I liked it, but it wasn't really that outstandingly great. I mean, it was interesting, but it wasn't like the best book I've ever read, so.
Okay, there we go. 3
right.
stars and 2.5, and we will see you in a minute. Welcome back. Next up, we are doing a slacker fiction novel called JPOD by Douglas Coupland. Ethan Jarlowski works long hours as a video game developer, surfing the net and having really random conversations with his coworkers in JPOD. Now, JPOD is the area of his company that he works in where everyone's last name begins with J. Well, they're all small-time developers, and they're working on a video game that is a very cool skateboarding game. Well, all of a sudden, marketing decides there needs to be a cute little turtle involved. But before Ethan can worry about that or win the heart of Caitlin, his coworker, he has to help his mom bury the biker that she electrocuted in the family basement where her marijuana plants grow. He has to give his actor dad yet another pep talk, and he has to feed the 20 illegal Chinese immigrants that his brother has hidden, of course temporarily, in his apartment. Then he passes his downtime by trying to find a wrong digit in the first 100,000 digits of pi. And those are conveniently printed on pages 383 to 406, just in case you want to try to find it yourself.
I love that.
All right, I'm gonna read a little bit here. By the way, I Googled Caitlin, and you'd be surprised what I found. You Googled her? Well, of course I did, didn't you? I'd somehow forgotten to perform this essential task. Well, let's have a peek, shall we? A few kicks later, Caitlin Anna Boyd Joyce went into the Google request box. A predictable landslide of genealogical files filled the screen. Big deal. Yes, but what happens if I go back and enter her name again and click the I Feel Lucky button? Nobody ever clicks that button. Well, maybe they should start. The genealogical mulch came back, but there was a new hit at the top of the page. Dark stories from the subway diet? John said, exactly.
That clip is so indicative of this novel. It is all about pop culture references. It is all about just extremely random things that these people say and do with each other.
It's just unbelievable that I want this job where I have so much time on my hands that I can also have a contest over who can write the most convincing letter to Ronald McDonald to be his mate. I'm like, what?
They spent the entire day writing these letters to Ronald McDonald saying, this is why we would be perfect together. And
This is why I would be, I would be the perfect girl for you, Ronald. And you're just like, why?
And they print these letters that each individual character
The
writes
best
to
part.
Ronald McDonald. As the synopsis said, there's lots of subplots going on
Oh, yes.
with Ethan and his family, and the Chinese immigrants, and the dead biker, and the marijuana farm that his mom has, and the affair that his dad is having with a very young production assistant who then begins stalking him. I mean, there's so many little subplots going on, and I think that's where it fell a little bit short for me. Was the subplots weren't always quite believable. Like, if your mom really called you over and said, okay, I killed somebody in my basement, you have to help me bury them, would you really do that and then just go home and be like, la la la? I mean, there were no consequences to anything
I don't know.
that happened in this book.
With this guy's life, I think he would just go home and be like, la la la.
True, possible. But certain things rang a little like, okay,
Yeah, it wasn't,
a little two-dimensional to me. But again, that's actually part of the point
I
of
mean,
this book.
that's what Douglas Coupland is going for.
Exactly.
And like the characters in this story, unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
John Doe, whose name was previously
Crow something.
Crow or something, and it was all like lowercase letters. His mother was like a hippie and lived in a
was a
commune.
hippie lesbian commune,
So-
who decided that capital letters were bad because they
looked
one,
down.
one letter was better than another.
They looked down on the lowercase letters, so no capital letters.
Like, what? No, capital letters are capital.
And so he strives his entire life to be John Doe.
Completely
He changes
average.
his name to be John Doe and does only things that average people would do. Like,
are statistically average.
yeah, he looks it up. What's statistically average to do in this situation is what he's going to do.
Exactly.
Oh, he's
Like,
so
even
hilarious.
to the point of video games, which are his livelihood. When he plays them, he will only get a certain amount good because he doesn't want to get better than average.
Right.
Like, is that even any fun? I don't know.
I don't know. I think that would be kind of like one of those things where to make that your goal to only do average things. I think that would be kind of fun. I might try to do that.
You go for it. Let
I
us know
will.
how you do. Also in this story, there are, in addition to the subplots with Ethan's family, there's the subplots within the pod, JPOD. There's that horrible marketing idea of they have this really cool skater game, and it's set in this urban area, and the skaters are, skater punks, and then all of a sudden there's this cute little turtle sidekick because the marketing guy's kid likes turtles.
Kids like turtles.
So-
My kid likes turtles. Let's put turtles in everything.
And that part of it can totally relate to anybody working anywhere, because everybody's boss has had a really stupid idea that you have to then implement.
Of course. Smiling.
Right,
Yes,
smiling.
great idea.
Yes, we can. So there are a lot of things in this book that are extremely indicative of today,
Oh,
and
yes.
that's exactly what this book is all about.
Well, that's like the whole genre of slacker fiction. It's not really well known. I have to say, I looked this up years ago and discovered this kind of underground genre called slacker fiction, which is mainly novels that are aimed for 20 to 30-year-olds about mainly real life stuff. It's not really fantasy, it's not science fiction, it's real life stories about what goes on in these, 20 to 30-year-olds. And JPOD is a perfect example of that. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, it may be a little complicated, but at the same time, there's so much that you can relate to it. It's like a bizarre version of Office Space.
It is.
And if,
That's
you
a
know-
very good description. It's Office Space in print, slightly twisted. There are lots of things that are printed in this book that really don't mean anything.
Oh,
There are
yes.
entire pages of numbers. There are, which, like we said, the first 100,000 places of pi, or there's a page of numbers, and you have to find the one capital 0 or capital O.
And it's not
that's
just
mixed
a
in.
page, it's like
10
10 pages.
So although that, I totally got the humor of that, and I laughed my butt off the first 2 or 3 times. By like the 10th time there was something like that, it really just kind of annoyed me and disrupted the flow of the book to me. But But in the beginning, I totally got it. It's a funny concept, you know, that they spend their days doing things like this, and yet they go back to work and they're at work for, what, 10, 12 hours a day just because they don't have anything else to do, you know. So it's definitely things that happen to people of our age right now all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So all in all, I gave this book 2.5 stars. It was fun to read in terms of, like I said, the modern references and Googling people, you know, is the first thing you have to do when you enter the JPOD, you know, things like that. It's fun to read, but those pages of numbers really got to me after a while. Brought it down a whole half star. So,
Well, I gave it 2.5, but for a completely different reason. I enjoyed the book very, very much. There were some really good parts of it that jumped out and just made it worth reading. The problem was that it's a really long book, and the parts that were really good just weren't enough to carry the rest of it, and it got really kind of dull for a while. But there were the really good parts that you just make you laugh. And you're just like, this is awesome.
I agree.
Laughing out loud, making other people listen to you read it, you know, that kind of stuff.
Totally agree. So 2.5 stars across the board on that one.
Yep.
Let's go on and recap.
All right.
Everything that we've read today. First was The Harrowing, which was our ghost story fiction novel, and that got 2.5 stars from me and 3 stars from Brandy.
We got The Pirates book by Celia Rees, which Kelly gave 3 stars and I gave 2.5.
And then we've got JPOD by Douglas Coupland, which both of us across the board gave a roaring 2.5 stars for. Thanks a lot for joining us, and we will see you next time.